Hi, I'm Michael Kraft, and this is my Ignite presentation titled The Bill of Rights versus the U.S. Constitution, A History of Constitutional Rhetoric and the American Myth. This presentation will highlight some of the questions that have sparked my interest in constitutional rhetoric, and those that I have yet to answer. Namely, what does the U.S. Constitution mean to Americans? Why does it mean that? And when did the rhetoric surrounding the Constitution shift from politics and economics to civil rights or liberties? This was all sparked by a book I read for a class earlier in the semester, Unruly Americans and the Origins of the Constitution by Woody Holton, a professor of early American history at the University of South Carolina. Unruly Americans is a book that explores and describes the tumultuous events leading up to and directly informing the U.S. Constitution. In this book, Holton doesn't talk about the framers as men of egalitarian idealism who were fighting for freedom and equality, but instead as men focused on a more pertinent and pressing issue: the fledgling and crumbling American economy. Terrible recession led to an economic crisis, which created multiple political crises, which brought about instability, which all in turn led to the eventual formation of the federal government under the new Constitution to address these challenges. Liberty had nothing to do with it. But if this is the case, then how come the Bill of Rights stands as the centerpiece of our constitutional order? This question was posed by Akil Reed Amar, a professor at the Yale Law School, in an article published in the Yale Law Journal in '91. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights have a rich interplay, but are split up and taught as wholly different and sometimes antithetical documents, with most of scholarly discussions surrounding the Constitution being more, if not entirely, focused on the Bill of Rights. Well, this is what I'm trying to figure out. See, Holton presents an experiment to his readers, ask any American what the Constitution means to them and see what they say. And I've done this. I've asked my parents, family members, my wife, friends, classmates, professors, and even a handful of strangers. By and large, the answer always mentions civil rights, civil liberties, freedom, equality, justice, etc. In other words, the Bill of Rights. So then I ask them, what about economics? And I get the same question back. Well, what about economics? And this is the issue. Most Americans don't think of the Constitution as an economic document, something Jeremy Kessler refers to as the Great Forgetting in an article written for the Texas Law Review in 2016. He explains this as the exclusion of economic reason from constitutional analysis. Put in other words, Americans don't know the history or the meaning of the Constitution. Not really. We're fixated on the Bill of Rights, on ideology, the American myth, that which enshrines our forefathers as paragons of equal standing to ancient Greece's most famous heroes. That myth is one that paints America as the good guy, the country everyone wants to go to because it's the place where freedom was born, a country whose founding fathers fought for rights, for justice, for equality. Now, neither I nor Holton nor any of the other sources I've encountered during my research are interested in demonizing the founding fathers, far from it, but we're curious about where this myth comes from. See, as Holton and others have painted it, the framers of the Constitution were originally against the inclusion of a Bill of Rights at all. Some feared it would give the fledgling federal government too much power, and others thought that state legislators should be left to dictate the rights of their citizens. And more still were focused on the issues of economics and political instability that plagued the country at the time. In fact, we owe the Bill of Rights, ironically, to some of the Constitution's staunchest opponents. The lack of a Bill of Rights was an issue many anti-federalists used to refuse accepting the new Constitution, and it wasn't until after a Bill of Rights had been promised that these opponents began to accept and eventually ratify it. But we don't celebrate these men. They were against the Constitution, against the new American government, against the America that we all love today. So then I ask, when did the shift in narrative surrounding the Constitution first start to occur? How far back does it go? Tracking the shift in rhetoric has been problematic, as even today, most of the scholarly sources I've come across talk about the Constitution through the lens of the Bill of Rights and the American myth. Of the sources I've found, the one that most directly addresses the rhetoric of surrounding the Constitution is Gerard Maglioca's book, The Heart of the Constitution, How the Bill of Rights Became the Bill of Rights, published in 2018. Maglioca tracks the history of America's celebration of the Bill of Rights from the first Bill of Rights Day, officially declared by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1941, a whole 150 years after the Bill of Rights had been ratified and adopted into the Constitution. Why so long? Unfortunately, I don't have a definitive answer to these questions yet, hence my upcoming proposal, but what I've unearthed so far has been thought-provoking and eye-opening, and I hope to continue this research to uncover answers and finally begin tracking the shift in rhetoric surrounding the Constitution. On this last page, you'll find a list of some of the sources I've been using for my research. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this subject as fascinating as I do. Hi, I'm